Hey, good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, whenever you happen across this truth bomb. My name is Patrick Lovell. It is Thursday, March 23rd, 2023 at 8:45 a.m. my time. And man, do I have a lot to truth bomb about. Have you ever had any sort of moment in your life where you have been striving for some sort of objective, something that you've dreamed about, something that you've reached for, that you've sacrificed for, that you've thrown everything into to create, whether it's something to get through, I don't know, school, a certain level of GPA, to get into a certain college, to get into a certain program, to get into a certain profession, and to achieve from that point forward. That is really, I think, the mechanics of everything that constitutes the ideal of the American dream. That we have freedom, that we have the liberty, that we have the tenacity, that we have within ourselves the ability to get to where we desire to be. And that's a beautiful thing. But unfortunately, many of us know that no matter how hard you try, sometimes it doesn't come together. Unfortunately, I acknowledge that, but I don't believe that. Otherwise, I wouldn't continue to do what I do day in, day out in a way that is just relentless, because it's just, for whatever reason, the way I'm made. I do not tolerate injustice. I do not tolerate hatred. I do not tolerate liars. I believe in the dynamism and the spirit of the American ideal, which is to work very hard to become what you envision yourself to be. That's who I've always been. That's what I've always done. Now, have I gotten to where I want to go? Honestly, in some ways, I have. In some ways, I've gone way beyond anything I could have ever dreamed of, to be quite frank with you. But that's kind of not true, because I've always had very, very high expectations. So therefore, I'm never satisfied with what I've done, because it's not exactly what I aim to achieve. Now, let me be crystal clear. I'm not telling you this because I want you to be enthralled with who I am. This isn't about me. I'm trying to make a connection with you to lay out the world we're actually in at the moment, and have been for a very long time. That I'm doing everything I can to connect with you, to penetrate your space, to make you understand who I am, where I've come from, and what I've done, because it's in the purpose to benefit all of us that are American, that want to live within the scope of what I just laid out, which is becoming more and more difficult these days, and has been for at least the last 20 years, as a result of the failure of our system of character. I learned long ago that there are two columns of our soul. There's a character integrity, and there's hypocrisy, duplicity, and complicity. Our soul shifts to either pole of our soul depending on the circumstances and who we are. I have never shied away from truth, justice, and what is right. I know the difference between right and wrong. I understand collaboration versus exploitation. I understand ambition versus deception. None of these things work in congruency. You have to have character and foundation to actually become, I believe, what you envision yourself to be. And if along those lines you actually make a deal with the devil, a Faustian bargain, you become a liar in the process, you'll never get your soul back. Do I speak for God? Do I speak for Satan? No, I just think that's common sense. But the long and the short of it, I'm saying all of these things just in service to try to, one, start off in a way that we understand each other. Because what I'm about to lay on you is really the arc and stone of legitimacy of everything that this incredible murky power structure of lies and deception from our government, from our media, from even our law enforcement and judicial institutions have betrayed. All of them. All of them betrayed what we're supposed to be, particularly emanating from the professional class, who I'd say aren't professional. I'd say they're duplicitous con artists. And the ones that we're supposed to, trust that media legitimizes, and I'll start with economists. They're the ones that are the most full of shit. Honestly, it took me, let's put this into perspective. I'm 54 years old right now. On the eve of my 40th birthday, where I thought my life was coming together in all the ways that I had, at least to a degree, achieved, were about to put me in a very good place. But unbeknownst to me, the world was falling apart around me. And as such, this tidal wave avalanche of misery fell upon my head and millions of people like me, and it ultimately shot me out into a desert where I felt naked, alone, and I had to save my family. It was not an easy task, I can assure you. And it hasn't been the entire way. It has been a righteous grind through hell. And what, Winston Churchill said was exactly what I believe. When you're in hell, keep going. So where I want to begin this truth bomb is this revelation of everything that is on display with all things Trump that are indicative of everything that I have been telling you. And then I need to reveal some things that fell on me last night, particularly from someone I've worked closely with for some time, who was dropping truth bombs at a atomic level. And on that note, look, guys, I'm very critical of media, as you've well known by this time if you've been paying attention to these truth bombs. But they're all full of shit. They're all liars. It doesn't matter if it's Fox, MSNBC, CNN, quite frankly, PBS, and then, of course, local network news or, nightly news on the network level. Nobody is going to tell you what it is that I'm going to tell you. There's this hive thing. There's this sort of conformity. There's this sort of editorializing that determines what we are fed or force-fed, depending on the circumstances, of what we think our attention should be drawn to and what qualifies as news. And in this particular case, the most absurd circus of buffoonery has been on display for now, going on 5 years as a result of the then Trump administration all the way through the aftermath into the insurrection and what we're into right now. But on that note, I do want to say and qualify that, out of all of the mainstream buffoons that get paid top dollar to basically scramble your brains and lie to you night in and night out, to basically fulfill an objective, a quota, if you will, of nightly ratings based on what the producers are telling their talent that we have to, create stories for to be able to obtain, and retain their audience share, which is incredibly cynical, jaded, but it's a business model of lying. That's all it is. And it's been going on now for over 2 decades. But where we are now is literally the worst I've ever seen or ever experienced. And it's off the rails, crazy chain. And it starts with Trump. Now, I do want to say there's one caveat to all of the mainstream folks, in primetime that I watch that I think actually is someone of merit, is someone who's actually worthy, and he's pretty goddamn funny at the same time. And I just want to say that Lawrence O'Donnell is somebody who actually delivers important information. But on that note, everybody else is full of shit. And he might be pretty full of shit on occasion too. But look, man, let's just think about some of the things that we've seen over the course of the last week. So the special investigation of the DOJ had announced a criminal fraud exception yesterday by way of what the documents at Mar-a-Lago and the interaction between Trump and his attorneys reveal. Now, as it turns out, the criminal fraud exception does not allow attorneys to lie on behalf of their clients. I'm not sure if you're aware of that, but that is a felony. That is a significant offense. If you're an attorney who gets caught perjuring on behalf of your client to the court of law, you'll get your license yanked, presumably, and you won't have an opportunity to do what you spent years and years and years fighting to achieve. Like I said in my open, that you could just betray yourself by lying for your client, if of course your client is somebody like Donald Trump, who historically has been able to get every attorney that's ever worked for him to lie for him. In fact, he was not apologetic or shy when he said, "Where's my Roy Cohn?" Roy Cohn worked for Senator McCarthy, who then was later indicted for doing exactly what we're talking about, lying, and his career was destroyed. And he had his bar license removed, and he spent the rest of his life in obscurity. But meanwhile, this is somebody that Trump would proclaim is his champion, somebody in the legal profession that would lie for him. So as it turns out, we also found out that false statements to the government by way of business document fabrication, is, who would have thought, a felony. All right, now let's just take those two things as a standalone, and let's compare what is now top-line news from every news network that exists, but in comparison to what it is that I've been telling you this whole time. So attorneys, as it turns out, for what we call foreclosure mills, which I'll call fraud closure mills, have been working with servicers on behalf of too big to fail institutions through some, depending on the company, a variety of LLC sort of separations, but directly to create documentation fabrication on millions of foreclosure documents to illegally foreclose on millions of Americans. Now, throw out of your mind whether or not those Americans paid, for those mortgages or not. Everybody had a different circumstance, and in some cases, some people were absolutely outrageous. But in most cases, most people were honestly trying to stay in their homes because they could afford to pay for the homes, but they couldn't determine who to pay, and they were hit with fees and all sorts of levies and all sorts of other things that manifested through these documentation lies that the courts and the judges have been allowing for 13 years. But most importantly, allowing after the national mortgage settlement revealed everything that I'm telling you. And in that national mortgage settlement, there was a $25 billion fine to the top servicers in the United States for doing exactly what I'm telling you. But the practice never stopped. I have been witness to a foreclosure defense attorney in South Florida by the name of Bruce Jacobs, who's been able to get public hearings via Zoom, where I've seen judges say that they will not allow discovery, and they will create preemption, and then they will create, I can't remember the other legal, the legal code of conduct that allows, in this cases, the attorneys to have a degree of levity within the court based on their integrity that can't be impugned, without even showing the evidence. It's just a setup. It's a railroad job. If you ever saw Animal House and you saw Delta House basically getting set up by Dean Wormer and of course all of his bootlickers from the popular fraternities, that's what we're talking about. So fraud closure mills have been operating with impunity for the past 13 years. Using, in my estimation, I think tens of millions of illegal documentation or documents to illegally foreclose on millions of people. I personally have access to over 100,000 pieces of documentation evidence of robo-signing used in illegal foreclosures that came through the Registry of Deeds. Only two honest Registry of Deeds in the United States kept those records, while the rest in the United States went along with the show to bulldoze millions of people who were set up with liar's loans. But hey, if it's Trump, let's go freaking batshit crazy over the fact that, suddenly a judge is recognizing that the attorneys could be lying on behalf of their client, which would then, be grounds for criminal fraud exception, which is just exactly what happened in the case of the Mar-a-Lago documents, based on the special counsel from the Department of Justice. Now, also, if those lawyers lie to the court, to the state, to the country, that's perjury. Those are high-level felonies. Those will get your bar license yanked, big fines, and you thrown in jail. So what happens when foreclosure mills and servicers do this in millions of cases with the judges being complicit in such activity? Compared to one former con president that's now getting run through his own mistakes in the way that the judicial system should work. I'll let you try to be the judge of that. But I promise you, all of the evidence that I'm telling you I have. Now, beyond that, the word last night were that MAGAs were starting to go after DJ Alvin Bragg in a number of ways, particularly kind of the PR sort of setting of deceptive protection, that he's a tool of George Soros. Really? I wonder why they would do that. An African-American DA connected to a Jewish financier. Now, I'm not going to say that George Soros is an innocent guy across the board, because I know that George Soros is a top financier, hedge fund guy, like a lot of other con artists that have done a lot of stuff that I haven't actually gotten under the hood of. But it's not because, in my estimation, he's Jewish, which is what these right-wing media outlets are inferring, that of course it's the evil, blood-sucking vampire Jews that are controlling the whole thing. That's what they want you to believe. I can assure you right now that yes, there are a lot of Jews in finance. There are a lot of Jews, percentage-wise, at the highest levels of both the law and other elements in this process. And there are many of them who have been involved with absolutely horrific deceptive acts and practices that are completely illegal. But I can also assure you, A, that there's a lot of Jews that were on the right side of this. Former Attorney Mark Dan of Ohio was the only Attorney General of the United States to bring down RICO conviction against this process. And there are many, many others that I have been involved with, in the process, that are heroes that have actually done all the right work on this. So understand that you can't blame one group of people for any massive unrest or fraud, because as we've also seen, it includes women, it includes African Americans, it includes Christians of all stripes, and I dare say it includes Buddhists, includes Hindus, includes Muslims, although I haven't seen many Muslims in the mix, but I would imagine there are some. And the bottom line is, it's just criminal and illegal, and yes, very diabolical and very deceptive. That all leads to betrayal. There's no question about it. That has absolute calamity. But you can't blame one group of people, and please be aware that there's a lot of people that are on the right side of this that constitute all of those other groups as well. Understand the crime. Don't blame it on one specific group of people. That comes down to what I said at the very beginning of this, character. John Adams said that we're a government of laws, not men. But in this particular case, we can see that in the case of Trump, after 6 years and actually decades of him getting away with all of this stuff, finally, for whatever reason, because he's become a political threat, but he's also become a useful freaking receptacle of all of this stuff, so that we don't know what it is that I'm telling you behind the scenes that is orchestrating something at a much, much bigger level. The bottom line is, the law isn't supreme. The law can and has been, for the course of the last 20 years, used to suppress the masses and let the villains get away with this stuff. That's the ultimate betrayal. That's through the revolving door. That's through perverse incentives. That's through this whole revelation that, oh yeah, liars can lie for their clients. Oh yeah, unless they're held accountable, which is insane. And the question that I've had, for the media throughout this whole period is like, okay, interestingly enough, Michael Cohen, of course, the fixer for Donald Trump, who's at the whole intersection of this whole Stormy Daniels payment scenario that could have led to, fabrication of business records, as well as, which I think is the funniest thing of all, the the election. What am I trying to say? It's like the law that's against the. Oh my God. It's just silly because campaign finance law violations. Okay, in the midst of Citizens United and dark money. I mean, literally, all they'd have to do instead of just do immediate payments directly and try to hide, the cover up for what it was for that was against and then what they said later that was easily traceable. If they were, like the Koch brothers, they would just have created a 501c4, put some silly name on it, funded it, and then they would have fucking gotten payments to Stormy Daniels, and nobody would have been the wiser. And it would have been legal underneath the statutes of Citizens United, which is dark money, which is insanity. And, but leave it to, Trump to really just do the bare bones, least advantageous thing, didn't think it through and just lied with impunity, and now he's going to get busted for it. And it's one of many things that he's going to get busted for. The one that's been making the most noise, because I guess it's the first one to go, but it's the smallest infraction of everything else that he's been involved with, which is absolutely ridiculous. And on that note, in terms of credibility of the media, how many of you remember about, I don't know, circa 2018 or something like that, where Michael Avenatti, who was the attorney for Stormy Daniels, didn't he end up going to jail? I think he went to jail for stealing from his clients and tax evasion. So yeah, the government, it's absurd. They can get the lawyers, especially on tax evasion, which is a big deal. I think he got freaking nailed for 14 years into the pen. Which, holy shit, but at the same time, that happened during the Trump administration. So he's going after Trump, he makes some mistakes, and the DOJ brings down the law, which is cherry picking to take out Michael Avenatti for stuff that, that the Trump attorneys and DOJ underneath, God, I'll come back to his name in a little bit, the Walrus man, but who was cherry picking all day long and weaponizing justice, and now you've got all of the pigs at the trough of the Republicans claiming that the Democrats are weaponizing the Department of Justice. Meanwhile, the Department of Justice is like our military, so you get this sense from media that the Department of Justice is overwhelmed with all things Trump. Trump is a slam dunk tiny piece of what those guys are involved with day in and day out. There are thousands of attorneys and top level professionals of the DOJ with all of the resources they have. And quite frankly, if we really wanted to clean things up, which is what I am professing, you would have somebody like my freaking mentor, William K. Black, become the Attorney General of the United States. And you watch how fast white collar crime would be controlled. Not to mention our financial markets and all of the corruption that's happening there within. The Department of Justice is gigantic. It's enormous. You have no idea what the Department of Justice is capable of doing because, unfortunately, the Department of Justice has been weaponized for hiding the mass corruption, while, of course, leaping into action now for what is seemingly the threat that they're willing to take down. But like I've said before, I think it's, in the case, like, for example, of Fani Willis, there's been some discussion whether or not that Trump might be indicted for RICO violations in the state of Georgia for, the electioneering fraud and defrauding the United States like the January 6th Commission had already laid out. But, in the case of RICO, my God, yeah, of course Don was involved with RICO. And it would be a fitting way to take him down. And I certainly hope that's the case. But in what I continue to tell you, that we discovered the only RICO conviction in the country for the massive con that led to the 2008 financial crisis, disaster, destruction of the world that took out over 100 million people and led them to a life of misery, suicides and divorces and homelessness and all that sort of thing. None of that is on the radar of the mainstream media. That's like yesterday's news, right? Except it never ended. And so everything that's going on with Donald Trump, especially practices that went back to the 70s, is part of the news cycle for Donald Trump. What I'm trying to tell you is that the entire scenario of media and law is basically circling its attention and focusing and hyper-focusing on Donald Trump and demonstrating through the process all of the things that Trump is guilty of. And I should thank Donald Trump for this, that the entire system is guilty of. I mean, you got to understand that it's a circus. Did you ever see, and I'll use this as kind of a metaphor because it's pretty interesting between the fictional world and reality. So one of my favorite movies of all time is actually a musical. Shocking, I'm sure, for those of you who have heard me drop some of my favorite titles of movies and television shows and series and that sort of thing. But Chicago, that was produced by Miramax, which of course is none other than Harvey Weinstein, right? But in the movie, it was an amazing display through the song and dance of the legal profession that's trying to get a murderer off the fricks and how media responded to it until the next show came. That's what we're looking at here with Donald Trump. Now, ironically, behind the scenes, as it turns out, Harvey Weinstein has got a systemic rape culture that uses the complicity of his HR, which are females, to set up female professional talent so it can have leverage over them. Okay? I mean, the line between fiction and reality is extraordinary. But it all came to a head last night when I happened later in the afternoon, and I got the email earlier in the day, but I knew that because I set it up, I actually called my friend Paul J., who is a fantastic journalist and he has a fantastic podcast, and he's frequently interviewed William K. Black on many occasions, and because of the meltdown with Silicon Valley Bank and things that were going on with Credit Suisse, and then the questions about the Federal Reserve and regulation and everything else, I said, hey, it might be a good time to talk to Bill. And so Bill was interviewed by Paul J's go-to guy. I can't remember his name, a great guy, but there was just a fantastic interview last night that I would encourage you all to go watch right after you've watched this, and then spread it like your life depends on it, because Bill Black brings all of what I'm telling you in stark contrast of what's going on with finance and what has been going on with finance for roughly 35 years. So we are in a mess. We are in a cesspool of just insane carnage that's based on the corruption that I'm trying to reveal to you. But it's really easy. It's not rocket science. It's racketeering. And economists, all of the ones that we listen to, give you half-truths and lie to you. All of the institutions that media wants to project to us as experts in the field are lying to us. What you're not seeing on Lawrence O'Donnell, unfortunately, but of course not Rachel Maddow, and of course not Tucker Carlson, and of course not Anderson Cooper and all the rest, is William K. Black. He's the Michael Jordan of criminologists. I mean, he's a professor of law, a doctor at the University of UKMC, PhD, I think, in economics, as well as a professor at University of Minnesota as well. But he was the only, I shouldn't say only, because he was part of an incredible team of guys that got this right back in the 80s during the S&L crisis, because they understand all of different variables of banking and finance and law, quite frankly, particularly regulation. There's a safe way to handle finance, and then there's a very dangerous way that to allow finance to go unchallenged. And that's what we've done when we've gotten rid of all of the regulation and the cops on the beat to enforce the laws to make sure stupid, ridiculously stupid things don't happen that have absolutely enormous and catastrophic consequences on the entire world. So what I'm trying to tell you is, like, for example, what I've revealed to you over and over and over is that Federal Reserve Act 13.3 was used illegally as the lender of last resort to pump trillions of dollars behind the scenes while the media was working with all of the top people in our government, as well as all of the top people in our financial system, to lie to us and the world directly that they were going to save us through the TARP funds, which was a tiny drop in the bucket compared to what they did behind the scenes, that illegally, to basically buy toxic assets that the financial system created, that I put on display because I learned it all from William K. Black, and we created The Con at www.thecon.tv, which lays out the entire grift and exactly how it worked and why it was illegal and why all of the CEOs of this country should have A, been indicted and convicted under RICO statutes that ultimately led to stock clawbacks where the banks were nationalized until we cleaned them up and then basically turned them over to people that would do honest business and get rid of the frickin' trash, which these CEOs in this polluted, toxic environment have been able to run roughshod because nobody understands how the system is supposed to work. Nobody understands the law. Nobody understands finance. They just look at the bling and expect, oh, hey, these guys at the apex of the situation have all the control. Don't ask any questions. Meanwhile, you're struggling from one job to the next. Maybe you've got many jobs. Maybe you're in debt up to your eyeballs. Maybe you've got a family and you're like not wondering what's going to happen tomorrow when the shoe drops if the economy goes sideways, which it might. But guess what the economy is not going sideways for? The fucking bastards that are doing this to you and us and me and everyone you can see. What they're getting away with is insane backdoor socialism. We have spent $70 trillion to the financial system, which is a tiny group of people in comparison to the population writ large. To put it into comparison, we hear it all the time that, oh yeah, we created free money and we went nuts like a drunken sailor and then, basically gave money out like it was, like rain and candy sort of thing. Yeah, and then they hang their hat on the fact that, people who had to stay home from their jobs, would get, based on their families, I think like $1,200 in emergency checks, right? I think $2,400 per family, depending on your child, that sort of thing. I think it was like a $600 credit per child. Okay, meanwhile, the top 1% had a direct correlation of $900,000 in their bank accounts based on QE spending. Okay? So that's to the top 1%. That's direct infused into their account. That's not for anything else. Plus, they got free money to buy assets that the government was actually, through the Federal Reserve, buying these assets back from the primary dealer brokers, which created hyperinflation. And then also supply chain problems and everything else. And then also free money to the guys that have absolute control, which are the monopolies. Which we don't have a free market. We don't have the integrity of law. The law is not supreme. Donald Trump might be on the verge of finally having justice, rain down on him like it should have, probably long before he ever became a president. I can assure you right now that Letitia James is going to bring a $250 million lawsuit based on all of the things that we show you in the con, which is control fraud. He is incredibly guilty of appraisal fraud, insurance fraud, hyperinflation of appraisals that he used to get loans from none other than Deutsche Bank, who was laundering money from Russia. So on top of everything else, it's treason. But then on top of that, he's got his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, of course, a Jewish guy, which is amazing when you consider all of the hatred towards Jews in Magaville. Not to mention Steve Mnuchin, is his former Treasury Secretary, and they're playing ball with Saudi Arabia. And I mean, my God, this goes on and on and on, and the corruption is insane, and yet nobody is listening. And I had somebody on my Twitter feed this morning say, look, Patrick's been bringing these truths to you over and over and over, and nobody's listening. Look, here's the thing, man. The bottom line is I'm a producer, okay? I'm not a politician. But what I'm doing is I'm going directly to you because of all of the calamity that's involved. And I want you to understand this in terms of dark money, in terms of fueling the system with corruption and everything else. I want you to think a bit about this, quite frankly, for those of you who can't put this together. It's going to be hard for you, but it's like climate, okay? So basically, climate changes. Anyway, I don't want to make the metaphor there. But the long and the short of it is what we have here is we've got the apex predators of the system, which I might call our multinationals. They might be the top guys in our finance, which are, huge banks, too big to fail banks, and, hedge funds and private equity and asset management. Like, of course, many of you have heard of BlackRock. BlackRock's the largest, most powerful company in the world that has probably more power than 90% of the most powerful countries on earth, because we put them in a position to basically hoover up all the destruction in the aftermath of the 2008 great financial crisis, and they got to pick and choose the winners, which they put themselves at the apex of, and they own everything. And they've suppressed this information. I'm absolutely sure of what I've been telling you this whole time. But in addition to that, you have the military-industrial complex. You have the fossil fuel complex. Then you have, agriculture, and then, pharmaceutical and biotech and all of the others that kind of emanate from that. But what we have is a corporate fascist state, really. particularly through finance, because it's undergirded by a criminal syndicate that uses socialism, which I just explained to you, and I've explained to you over and over and over, and I'm the only one that will ever explain it to you, that Federal Reserve Act 13.3, the ability of the Federal Reserve to be lender of last resort, that was, by the way, just like in Silicon Valley Bank, regulating the institutions that they should have prevented from blowing up. They blew up, and they were the ones there that were able to give trillions of dollars of liquidity to the bankrupted financial systems that got that way based on racketeering, based on fraud. Fraud is not shenanigans. Fraud is illegal theft by deception. There's a lot of degrees of it that go into, all sorts of, oh God, what am I trying to think of in terms of the, just the basics. I mean, literally, all of these are felonies, okay? They're just lying about what the product is and what they can do to get you set up in something that you can't see through it, because it's called asymmetric information. The whole thing is predicated on control fraud, which we show you in the con at www.thecon.tv, which is then fueled by Gresham's dynamic, which is through incentives, perverse incentives, that the CEOs can get the entire vertical of an operation to do what it wants based on the number. It incentivizes and rewards bad behavior, which are lies. And they do that so you can reach the number, because it's all based on short term. That's modern executive compensation, which gives the bonuses to the CEOs. So the whole thing's a lie. And the whole thing ends up blowing up. This isn't free market. This isn't somebody coming to the market because they're smarter, they're better, they're giving products that are better, they're innovative, they're this and that. No, and that they're winning the market, and then they, pay back their shareholders and everything's good because it's a rising tide raises all ships. No, man, this is just the opposite. The financial system is a parasite on the economy, and it has been since the 80s, since we've had the SNLs and the savings and loan madness. Then we had the junk bonds. Then we had ultimately all of the stuff that led to the tech bubble in the 2000 era, and then we had the Enron era frauds. And we have laws to protect ourselves against all of this, which then led to none other than the great financial crisis, and we've been living in that paradigm ever since. I know a lot of people want to get crazy about COVID, and there's a lot of questions about that. But then, regardless of what we do know and don't know about, where it came from and how it manifested, we do know that the world got shut down, and then that the Federal Reserve pumped trillions upon trillions of dollars to the guys that I'm telling you. Okay? It's just been one nonstop grift and looting scenario after another, and they have hijacked the United States. And so what happens is you have, through this whole, the best ROI that a corrupt institution can invest in is a politician, because it's pennies on the dollar for what they get in the back end. Okay, so like if you look right now at Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren and Robert Reich, they're all up in their arrears, basically talking about oh my God, it was the Trump administration that we got to blame for deregulation because of the Crapo bill that had a lot of Democratic involvement in 2018 that was watered down by none other than the signature name on the Dodd-Frank legislation, Barney Frank, who was involved with also crypto. Okay? They're all they're all pimps, whores, junkies, and then of course you have the population that are suckers. They're pissing on our heads telling us it's rain. Why do you want to be their fool? What I'm explaining to you is that I have all of the answers. We can literally bring all of this to light, and we can create a populist tidal wave crusade to purge corruption with the facts that can educate you on. But the point that I was trying to make just a moment ago is that you've got these corrupt businesses at the apex of the system that are guaranteed the backstop to basically continually lie to you, and then pay the politicians to continue to lie to us, and then and make sure that they're not held accountable, and of course the media to lie to us. It's all a lie. Everybody's lying to us. It's really the big lie. And it's way, way, way monumentally bigger than Donald Trump. And I was watching it in the last couple of days as I'm interacting with all of these scenarios and trying to get my head on straight about what I want to say to you folks to try to motivate you to get on board to save yourselves. And I came across this wonderful Indian film. I've now seen it 3 times. I watch it out of the corner of my eye when I'm doing other things. It's called RRR, and it's just kind of this fantasy depiction of these 2 guys that's almost like a love story between best friends that come together. But RRR, it stands for Rise-Roar-Revolt. The whole thing was about creating revolution in India against the imperial power of England, and the sun never sets on the English Empire. And at the end, there's this great scene where the English, the Yukon Jack is on fire and then the sun shines through, and it's over the top, and it's hilarious, and I love it. But at the bottom line, rise, roar, revolt. That's what we have to do. And so when this corrupt system that has absolutely control will bury you and me and everyone you see, unless all of us come together who isn't a Nazi, who believes in dignity, liberty, and integrity and sustainability to purge corruption. We have to come together in the tens of millions to purge corruption. But the only way that's going to happen is if you literally invest in this operation to get our country back, okay? What I'm asking you for is a $13 contribution. Why? Because 13 original colonies came together, in the odds in infinity to be able to, basically take on the largest, most powerful military force and financial and imperial force in the world at that time and defeat them. And in doing so, they created the Bill of Rights. They created, a roadmap through the Constitution, and then they created, of course, separation of powers. Because as Adams or Jefferson said, it's a great system if you can keep it, and the tree of liberty has to be quenched with the blood of patriots and tyrants for time to time for this to thrive. Rise, roar, revolt. $13 is all I'm asking, while billionaires spend hundreds of millions of dollars on political campaigns and liars in media to make sure you don't know what I'm telling you. So the first thing I would do is literally create a podcast where I would have Bill Black and me bring everybody who are the right people on this to bring the truths over and over and over that Rachel Maddow is not going to bring to you, that Anderson Cooper's not going to bring to you, that Tucker Carlson would never even consider bringing to you, let alone everybody else, okay? That's first and foremost. But we'll continue to build and to build and to build, and then eventually, as soon as I've got the budget, man, I want to put together a revival barnstorming tour where we take this information to the people, where we lay it all out. I've got hundreds and thousands of hours and pieces of documentation fraud to lay all of this stuff out that the Department of Justice and the Supreme Court has hidden because we are that corrupt. And the only way we are going to rise to the moment is to roar with the unison of the people that understand the facts to revolt. And that's exactly what it means to be an American. Revolt against tyranny. Now, I'm not saying that we're going to cut their heads off in the public square like the bloody revolution of the reign of terror of the French. I want justice through the law. I want the truth out there. I want us to be able to reveal what the top investigators and legal minds in the country who came out of the Department of Justice and FBI and the SEC, who are, ideologically conservative and more progressive, but who understand what the law is when you know what the facts are, to where you have accountability when you have criminals, which is what we haven't had for at least 20 years. And it's destroying us. I really appreciate all of you who have watched this. Please donate. Please share. Please come on board. Please put your first objective as, I'm going to donate $13 because I know I'm going to spend that at Starbucks. So I'm going to spend that for a couple of beers. $13 is nothing. But I would like you to recruit 13 people who believe that the country should be a dynamic country where people have the opportunity to build and fulfill their dreams in their lives based on sustainability and based on their own ability to achieve the American dream. That's the way the system was designed, and it's great if you can keep it, but we gave it up. It slipped through our fingers because of lies, deception, and our ignorance, and ultimately our cowardice. We have to rise and unify as one. Rise, roar, revolt. Onwards and upwards.